Good morning, this is Thomas from thomasjungauthor.com. Today is August 10th, 2026, and it's almost 9 a.m. So this is another late recording. In my video yesterday I exposed some more piggies. You know, why are they piggies? They're piggies because they are groomers. You know, these are the people who think they get to decide what becomes of people in what they call the gay community. And with that younger guy, he's all in on the latest ideological nonsense. He feels responsible for the queer people, you know. And it's not that all people are being groomed into, well, they're all being groomed into a certain ideology, which is the gay identity, which is the ideology of the world of hustling, prostitution, and organized crime. That's where the gay identity comes from. And especially in this country, that is also why, for example, why that identity is adopted now by so many people, because people find that alluring. You know, they want a little piece of that dark world that gives them, you know, it gives people a certain dark edge. It makes them feel like they are, you know, that they're cool guys and stuff like that. That's one of the reasons why that identity has become so popular. But even in the country where I'm from, Germany, I mean, in Germany, you know, traditionally, you know, the equivalent of the gay identity there was considered for trashy people. I mean, where I'm from, you know, you serious people or educated people do not make their sex their identity. And that's also how I always understood my sexuality. I never made it into my identity. So when other people say, oh, Thomas came out of the closet, or stuff, that is something, that is their interpretation of what I did, but not mine. And, you know, in my essays, you know, I talk a lot about these things and why I think it is a bad idea for most people to make that your identity. When you want to be enmeshed in that world of hustling, prostitution, and organized crime, that is a good identity for you. But if you're not interested in that, if you think that is not a good idea, if you don't want to live like a cruel teenager for the rest of your life, you should stay away from that world and that identity without having to be secretive about your sexuality. On their website, they say 80% of queer people are doing fine. So they define queer people as all people who engage in homosexual acts or gender non-conforming, intersex, all that stuff. And they claim that I am part of that queer community they claim to represent, which I'm not. I don't identify as queer, I don't identify as gay. I'm homosexual, everybody can know who I do it with, but I don't identify with these people. I don't want to be associated with these criminals. You know, and that creepy guy I showed you yesterday, that link of that young guy who calls himself, you know, an influential figure in the queer community of this town and the wider area, you know, Sittard. And he, you should read his text where he introduces himself. I mean, there is nothing modest about these people. He says he is known for his emphatic leadership and his ability to connect communities, whatever that means. His life has a lasting impact on the lives of many, and he's an important voice in the battle for equal rights and social justice. I mean, saying that about yourself, you know, is already, I mean, people who do, and he probably wrote this text himself. You see, in my essay, The Sentimental Exhibitionist, I also make this point. Many gay people are basically empty people. This, you know, they think that the image they portray of themselves is what they are, and that everything you have to do basically in your life is to create an image of yourself. That's also why these people lie about everything. They cannot say the truth about anything, because everything has to conform to the image of themselves they want to display in public. But you know, behind that facade is something very dark, and you can see that in not all the people, but some of the people that call themselves queer, because for them queer basically means I can get away with everything. You know, you have to respect everything I do, and you can see that in him. There is nothing modest about these people. These are very sinister criminals, and I think, you know, a lot of people know that. You should just, I mean, that guy, one time I saw him in the city center here, and he acted as if he didn't see me, but he came to look for me. He knows who I am, because he's probably linked to the piggy parties. That other asshole I talked about in the video is also linked to this queer community center. You know, he knows everything about me. He knows probably more about me than many of my family members or anything, because these people have been following me for years. So he has been briefed on everything, and he came to look at me. I mean, these are horrible people, and if I see that guy, you know, walking in the streets here, they know they can get away with everything now. They have no problem, you know, dressing up in fucked up clothing and then walking around here with that confidence they have. But you know, I will make sure I will keep reminding these people of what they truly are. I also want to talk a bit about, you know, yesterday I talked to you about that psychiatrist, Dr. Death, Pim Schippers, who contemplated in my file, in the notes he has to make about me. Oh, should we suggest Thomas euthanasia? Should we suggest that he is put to sleep? And then they refrained from doing that, but they found another solution to get me in trouble. So I was in psychiatric facilities before, and there they gave me, they have to, and they gave me certain diagnoses. And I think that those were 3 or 4 different ones. And then they said, no, let's give Thomas a new diagnosis. And then, well, then how do you, then they had the problem, of course, how do you justify those other diagnoses at the other psychiatric facilities? Well, they said, Thomas is a liar, so he made up things in order to get these diagnoses. So that was the image they were trying to portray of me, and that you can also see back in the file, the first file they gave me. In the other files, the more elaborate files, these documents are no longer there, where they say that. So, but you see, that is not how you get a diagnosis. That's not how I ended up in the psychiatric facilities. They painted the pictures of me as if I went to a psychiatrist and I said, oh, I have symptom A, B, and C, and then they gave me a diagnosis. But that is not how this came about. I ended up in the psychiatric facilities, and then they said, oh, he needs a diagnosis. They need that for, you know, other purposes, for financial purposes and stuff. So I never asked to get diagnosed, and my family was always active in getting me diagnosed and also getting me locked up for the rest of my life. And that's how I got these diagnoses. It was not something I said. I didn't lie about anything or anything, but that is what they implied. So the diagnosis they came up with was the following. Oh, Thomas suffers from, you know, borderline personality organization. You know, that is the sort of the underlying condition for all, let's say, cluster B personality disorders. So what did they say? Well, he has borderline personality organization and antisocial traits. And what they're basically saying was, you see, Thomas fools everybody. He's a psychopath. And at some point they even say it, but he's too smart. So in the end, we cannot prove it. So that's the diagnosis I got. But this is also the diagnosis that is in the system they use, the IT system. So whenever an employee of the psychiatric opens it, it sees Thomas has basically all cluster B personality disorders. So what is it? Borderline, narcissistic, antisocial, you know, histrionic. So that's the label I got. Because you see, they cannot give me the antisocial, the psychopathic personality disorder, because I never got in trouble with the law. I'm not an aggressive or violent person or anything else. I don't gossip. I don't do anything. But in order to smear me, they had to suggest, oh, Thomas is a psychopath, but we cannot prove it. That's basically the diagnosis I got. And then when I was there at the end, we protested this, and then I had to see a psychologist, and they did some new, they tried to find a new diagnosis, and then they said, well, at the end they said, well, yeah, well, Thomas is autistic, which of course is also, well, it's not entirely untrue, but I don't think I qualify for that diagnosis either. And that's your definitive diagnosis now. But these papers are also not found in the file they gave me at the end. But I can prove that it's there, because, you know, that psychologist gave me a paper and said, this is your definitive diagnosis. But they did not communicate that to the other doctors, or they didn't change it in their own systems. It's still there. So whenever now I don't know, somehow I will get in trouble, or, you know, they get me in trouble. You see, Thomas is a psychopath. So they even fooled me on that. I have to say, in the other psychiatric facilities, sometimes in the beginning I got some really bad treatment, but then they put me in another ward, you can say, and there it was okay. So there I had a lot of freedom, and the people there were always nice to me. So these were places not only where I was kept safe, but also where I was treated really well, and I met some really nice people, and you know, I found some relief in the past 10 years. So I'm not saying all psychiatric facilities are bad, but in the last one it is. And the doctors also change constantly. You know, there's a rotating system or something in place. So they go from institution to institution, not all of them, but most of them. So there is a network there. There's a malicious network within those facilities. Always at play. But there were also always people that protected me. But when you're in such a facility, you see, some people really tried their best to help me, and you know, they also taught me a few things. So in one facility, we had to do a course, because we constantly got in trouble and had substance abuse issues. You know, you have to. They said, well, we need to teach Thomas some skills. So they gave me this. I got a diploma. It says streetwise diploma. So they taught me, within those clinics, they taught me, you know, how to be streetwise. And that was a very funny course, because, you know, in that course it had 3 subjects. One of it was become more streetwise. And while we were doing it with a 3-day course, and then one day we were there, and there were 3 participants: me, another gay guy who was in a psychiatric facility, a guy I became very friendly with, and a, you know, very handsome, you know, muscular black guy who came, let's say, from a bad neighborhood in Amsterdam. While we were doing the streetwise course, you know, he of course didn't need it. And then he was telling us stories about, you know, how he beat up beggars and all other people. And then that other gay guy, you know, who came from a very wealthy family, he said to me, you see, even these people have still people to look down on. So there's, you know, they're also very funny. I also met some really great people, and there were some really funny situations. And I even now have a certificate that proves that I'm streetwise. So if you see me on the street, you know, you better watch it, because you know, me being streetwise is now certified, and I can show you proof. I can show you the diploma if you want to. So have a nice day. Thank you for listening. Bye bye.